Elena, a determined black woman, goes undercover as a maid in her wealthy white fiancé's family estate to uncover the truth about their beliefs. As she uncovers hidden prejudices and dangerous schemes, Elena faces the most difficult decision of her life. Should she fight for love or confront the ugly truth alone? Before we get started, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe for more exciting content, and let us know where you're watching from in the comments. Now, let's dive in. Elena's life had always been defined by ambition. As a successful business consultant, she was accustomed to moving in diverse circles, but when it came to her personal life, she often found herself navigating more complex terrains. This was especially true now that she was engaged to Michael, a kind and charming man from a wealthy family. While Michael seemed progressive, she couldn't shake a nagging feeling about his family, the Whitmores. His mother, Mrs. Whitmore, had always maintained a polite but distant demeanor toward Elena, her icy smile never quite reaching her eyes. Feeling a growing sense of unease, Elena proposed an unorthodox idea. She suggested to Michael that she go undercover as a maid in his family home. She wanted to understand the true nature of his family's beliefs about race and class without any filters. Initially, Michael was horrified by the suggestion, finding it extreme. However, Elena argued that this was the only way she could be sure of what she was walking into. After all, a lifelong commitment demanded an honest understanding of each other's backgrounds. Reluctantly, Michael agreed to Elena's plan, trusting her instincts even though it made him deeply uncomfortable. The family was told that a new maid named Lena would be joining them temporarily. Only Mr. Dawson, the family's longtime butler, was in on the plan. With her natural beauty concealed beneath a simple maid's uniform and hair tied back, Elena began her days serving the Whitmore family under an assumed identity. From the very first day, Elena experienced a sharp contrast in treatment. While Mr. Dawson treated her with dignity, Mrs. Whitmore's demeanor changed entirely. As Lena, she was instructed to speak only when spoken to and was rarely acknowledged in conversation. When Elena delivered breakfast one morning, Mrs. Whitmore barely glanced up, addressing her with the same detached tone reserved for unimportant matters. The indifference stung, but Elena maintained her composure. The house staff were a mix of kind individuals with stories of resilience. Elena bonded with them quickly, listening to tales of challenges they faced in their roles. There was Marcy, the cheerful cook who had been with the Whitmores for over a decade, yet had never been acknowledged for her dedication. And then there was Rosa, the elderly cleaning lady, whose arthritic hands still scrubbed floors while enduring biting remarks from Mrs. Whitmore about her slow pace. These stories disturbed Elena, highlighting a more pervasive issue than she initially anticipated. During her time undercover, Elena noticed that Michael's cousin, Peter, was the most outspoken in his views, often making offhand remarks that carried a racist undertone. When a conversation turned to socio-political topics, Peter didn't hold back from sharing his belief that people should stay in their lane. Elena's heart ached at the ease with which such comments were exchanged, often met with laughter or silent agreement. In private moments, Elena struggled with her emotions. She had hoped to prove herself wrong, to find warmth and acceptance behind the cold walls of Michael's family estate. But each day only seemed to confirm her worst fears. The deeper she immersed herself in this role, the more she questioned whether her love for Michael could withstand the weight of his family's deeply rooted prejudices. Still, she held on to a flicker of hope that Michael's love for her was real and strong enough to endure whatever truth she uncovered. Elena's journey had only begun, but she already sensed that she was testing not just the family, but also her own heart. Could she truly imagine a life where love was not enough to bridge the gap of deeply entrenched biases? The answer, she realized, would reveal itself in the coming weeks. For now, she had to endure and observe, hoping that somewhere amidst the judgments and dismissals, she would find a path forward. After 2 weeks of working as Lena, Elena became more adept at blending into the background while keeping her ears open. One day, as she was serving afternoon tea, Mrs. Whitmore's bridge club friends made sly comments about interracial marriages. "It's not that we're against it," one woman drawled. "It's just some unions are more suitable than others." Elena felt a burning anger rise within her, but managed to keep her face neutral. The situation reached a turning point during a formal dinner that Mrs. Whitmore organized for the town's elite. Elena worked tirelessly alongside the staff to prepare the extravagant affair, ensuring every detail was perfect. Yet as she stood silently by, she overheard disturbing conversations. Some guests openly criticized people of color achieving high positions in the corporate world, dismissing their accomplishments as diversity quotas. Elena's hands trembled with the effort it took not to reveal her identity in that moment. Michael remained blissfully unaware of the full extent of his family's prejudices. He visited the mansion regularly, expressing his love for Elena while casually dismissing her concerns as mere misunderstandings. He tried to reassure her that his mother's occasional coldness was simply her way of warming up to new people. But Elena knew better. She had seen the darkness lurking beneath the surface. Elena's nightly talks with the staff became her only source of solace. Marcy, the cook, revealed how she had faced a similar situation with a previous employer and had learned to accept that such biases would always exist in certain circles. But Elena wasn't ready to accept it as the status quo. She wanted more than tolerance, she wanted true acceptance. One evening, Michael's aunt, Sarah, who was usually reserved, approached Elena. "You're different from the other maids," she remarked, her voice low. "I see a spark in you, something I haven't seen here before." Elena thanked her, wondering if Sarah was beginning to see her true self behind the uniform. But before Elena could feel encouraged, Mrs. Whitmore interrupted, giving Elena a sharp look as if sensing something out of place. As the days passed, Elena noticed Mrs. Whitmore making more explicit efforts to draw a wedge between her and Michael. The matriarch frequently mentioned a more suitable match for Michael, an accomplished woman from a prominent family who had recently returned to town. It became clear that Mrs. Whitmore was not simply indifferent to Elena, she was actively scheming to separate them. Each day as Elena became harder to bear, Elena found herself wondering whether her love for Michael was strong enough to endure such cruelty. She felt the weight of every insult and dismissal, not just for herself, but for the countless others who endured this treatment daily. As Elena continued her undercover role, her days were filled with mundane tasks that took a toll on her both physically and emotionally. Yet, it was the conversations she overheard that drained her the most. One day, while cleaning Mrs. Whitmore's study, she stumbled upon a series of correspondence. The letters, neatly tied together, revealed Mrs. Whitmore's intentions to undermine Elena's relationship with Michael. There were explicit mentions of arranging meetings between Michael and a young woman from a well-known family. The letters spoke of this woman's social standing and how her background would maintain the Whitmore legacy. Elena's hands shook as she read the cruel, calculated words. The realization was both heartbreaking and infuriating. Mrs. Whitmore's resistance to her wasn't just passive, it was strategic. Elena tucked the letters back in place and resumed her duties, her mind racing. She wondered whether Michael had any idea about his mother's scheming. Did he realize just how far she was willing to go to preserve her perception of racial and social purity? The thought gnawed at Elena, eroding her trust in him. As Elena continued to bond with the staff, she found solace in their shared struggles. Rosa, the elderly cleaning lady, shared stories of her own family's challenges. Her son, a brilliant student, had been denied a scholarship because of systemic biases. Marcy, the cook, spoke of her late husband's struggle to be treated as an equal despite his skills as a chef. These conversations deepened Elena's resolve, reminding her that her experience in the Whitmore household was not an isolated incident, but a reflection of broader societal issues. Meanwhile, Peter's behavior became increasingly offensive. He started to make offhand comments to Lena directly, testing her composure. "So, Lena," he sneered one afternoon, "what do you think of this country? Do you feel at home here?" His words were laced with thinly veiled mockery, challenging her to reveal any sign of discomfort. Elena responded with a calm yet firm, "Home is where you feel respected." Peter chuckled dismissively, but she saw a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. One evening, as Elena was preparing the dining room, she overheard a conversation between Mrs. Whitmore and Peter. They were discussing the family's legacy and how Michael's choice of a partner could affect it. Mrs. Whitmore's voice was cold and determined. Michael needs to understand that marrying someone like her would bring scandal to our name. I won't allow it. Peter agreed, adding, "It's not personal, it's just business and tradition." The words felt like a dagger to Elena's heart, confirming her fears. Desperate for clarity, Elena managed to catch Michael alone during one of his visits. She tried to hint at the prejudice she had encountered, hoping he would recognize the extent of his family's biases. But Michael, unaware of the undercover test she was conducting, brushed it off as a misunderstanding. "My family is old-fashioned," he said with a nervous smile, "but they'll warm up to you in time." Elena's frustration grew. Michael's obliviousness was becoming harder to accept, and she found herself questioning whether he truly understood the depth of the challenge they faced. Determined to uncover more, Elena searched the estate for further evidence of Mrs. Whitmore's schemes. One day, she discovered a hidden drawer in the study containing photographs of Michael with various women, each with notes about their family backgrounds, accomplishments, and financial status. The notes highlighted what Mrs. Whitmore considered suitable traits: social influence, wealth, and most importantly, race. Elena felt sick to her stomach. The discovery was not just about her own situation, it was a testament to how deeply entrenched Mrs. Whitmore's prejudices were. Elena's anger simmered, but she knew she had to be strategic. She couldn't simply confront Mrs. Whitmore without risking further damage to her relationship with Michael. Instead, she decided to use her position as a maid to subtly challenge the family's biases. Whenever a derogatory comment was made, she would respond thoughtfully, prompting the family to reconsider their words. She also used her bond with the staff to highlight the humanity of those often dismissed as help. Michael, meanwhile, seemed increasingly torn between his love for Elena and his loyalty to his family. He began to notice small changes in Elena's demeanor, sensing that she was holding back something significant. His attempts to have deep conversations with her were often met with guarded responses. Elena felt trapped. She couldn't reveal the truth of her undercover role, but she also couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. One night, Elena overheard Mrs. Whitmore on a phone call, speaking candidly about her plans to end the relationship between Michael and that woman. The words were filled with disdain, as if Elena's presence was a mere inconvenience to be managed. But there was an unexpected moment during the call. Mrs. Whitmore expressed concern for Michael's happiness, stating that she believed he would regret marrying someone so different. It was a glimpse of vulnerability, however misguided, that added complexity to the otherwise rigid matriarch. As Elena continued to navigate the Whitmore household's complicated dynamics, she found herself growing stronger. The adversity she faced did not weaken her resolve. It fueled it. She realized that her undercover mission was not just about testing Michael's family, it was about testing herself. Could she confront the ugliest parts of society while still holding on to her dignity and compassion? The chapter closed with Elena standing before a mirror in the servants' quarters, staring at her own reflection. She felt a deep sense of sadness mixed with determination. She had set out to uncover the truth, and the truth was indeed harsh. But she knew she couldn't back down now. The real test was yet to come, and Elena was ready, no matter the cost. Weeks passed, and Elena's resilience was being tested at every turn. Each day brought a new wave of condescending remarks, judgmental stares, and subtle reminders that, in the eyes of the Whitmores, she was deemed lesser, both as Lena the maid and Elena, Michael's fiancé. The lines between her undercover identity and real self were becoming increasingly blurred, leaving her emotionally raw and exhausted. The growing tension reached a critical point one afternoon. Elena was in the parlor, cleaning the family's expensive crystal vases, when she overheard a conversation between Mrs. Whitmore and one of her friends, Grace, who had come over for tea. "Can you imagine," Grace began, her voice dripping with disdain, "Michael with someone like that? It would be a disaster for your family's reputation." Mrs. Whitmore responded with a thin smile, her words colder than ever. "He's just blinded by novelty. It will pass. I will make sure of it." It was at that moment that Elena's resolve hardened. The Whitmores had made it clear that they would never accept her, not because of who she was as a person, but simply because of her race and perceived social status. Elena felt a surge of righteous anger, knowing that she couldn't continue the charade much longer. Her love for Michael was real, but the situation was becoming unbearable. The turning point came during a family dinner, a formal gathering that included not just the immediate family, but also distant relatives and a few prominent guests. Elena, still disguised as Lena, served food with the other staff, keeping her ears open. The conversations at the table soon turned to social issues, with Peter, as usual, leading the discussion in an offensive direction. "I mean, let's be honest," Peter declared loudly. "Interracial relationships are complicated. There's too much history, too many differences. It's better to keep things simple." Elena clenched her jaw, struggling to maintain her composure. She watched as Michael, seated next to his mother, shifted uncomfortably but said nothing to challenge Peter. The guests nodded in agreement, and Mrs. Whitmore offered a faint, approving smile. Elena's heart sank further. She had hoped that Michael, at the very least, would stand up for her, even if he didn't know she was in the room. But his silence spoke volumes. Unable to bear it any longer, Elena finally made a bold decision. She approached the table, still wearing her maid's uniform, and interrupted the conversation. "Excuse me," she said, her voice steady yet filled with emotion. The room fell silent, and all eyes turned toward her, shocked by the audacity of a maid interrupting the family's discussions. Michael looked confused, not yet understanding what was happening. "What could you possibly have to say that's worth interrupting us?" Mrs. Whitmore asked, her voice laced with irritation. Elena took a deep breath. "I have something important to say, not as Lena the maid, but as Elena, the woman Michael plans to marry." The room erupted into murmurs and gasps of disbelief. Michael's face went pale as the realization hit him. Mrs. Whitmore's eyes widened, her composed facade cracking for the first time. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, struggling to maintain control. Elena's voice was calm, but her words were powerful. "I came here under the guise of a maid because I needed to see who you all really are. Beyond the polite smiles and rehearsed manners, I needed to know how you truly feel about someone like me becoming part of this family. And now, I have my answer." Michael stood up, his face a mix of anger and confusion. "Elena, what is this? Why would you do something like this?" "Because I needed to know the truth, Michael," Elena said, tears welling up in her eyes. "I needed to know if love alone was enough to break through the walls of prejudice that exist in this family." Mrs. Whitmore, now visibly shaken, tried to regain control of the situation. "This is absurd. You deceived us all. You had no right." Elena cut her off, her voice unwavering. "And you had no right to judge me without knowing who I truly am. You judged me not because of my character, but because of the color of my skin and where I come from. You saw me as less than from the start." The room remained silent as Elena continued. "I have heard the things you say when you think no one important is listening. I have seen how you treat the people who work for you, the very people who make this house run smoothly. And I've read your plans, Mrs. Whitmore, the letters you've written, the meetings you've arranged to try to replace me with someone you think is more suitable for Michael." Michael looked horrified. "Mother, is this true?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Mrs. Whitmore's face was pale, and she struggled to respond. I only wanted what was best for you, Michael. I never wanted you to suffer the consequences of a mistake." Elena's heart broke a little more, but she remained resolute. "The mistake here isn't me or my love for Michael. The mistake is the prejudice that has guided your decisions and actions. It's the idea that someone's worth is determined by the color of their skin or the family they come from." Michael, overwhelmed by the confrontation, tried to take Elena's hand. "Elena, please, we can fix this. I love you, and I'm so sorry for everything." But Elena pulled her hand back gently. "Michael, this isn't just about love. It's about the reality of what we're up against. I needed you to stand up for me today, even when you didn't know I was in the room. I needed to see if you could challenge the beliefs of your family, even when it's uncomfortable." Tears streamed down Michael's face as he realized the gravity of the situation. "I understand now, Elena. I see what you've been facing, and I know I failed you, but I promise I will change." Elena shook her head sadly. Change takes time, Michael. It takes more than just promises. It takes actions that challenge the very foundation of who we are taught to be. Mrs. Whitmore, finally broken, looked at Elena with a mix of anger and regret. What do you want, then? You've exposed us, humiliated us. Is that what you came here to do? Elena's response was simple but profound. I came here to find the truth, and now that I have it, I can make a decision based on reality, not illusions. As the dinner guests sat in stunned silence, Elena turned and left the dining room, her head held high. The confrontation had been painful, but it was also liberating. She had spoken her truth, no matter the cost. The Whitmore family was left to grapple with the harsh reality of their prejudices, exposed in the most unexpected way. The mansion was filled with a heavy silence after Elena's departure. For the Whitmore family, it was a moment of reckoning they never anticipated. Mrs. Whitmore, for once, found herself speechless, her carefully constructed world shattered by the boldness of a woman she had so thoroughly underestimated. Michael, meanwhile, was left devastated, torn between the love he felt for Elena and the stark reality of his family's prejudices. Elena returned to her small apartment, her heart feeling both heavy and liberated. It had taken immense courage to reveal her identity in such a dramatic fashion, but the reality of what came next was uncertain. She had loved Michael with all her heart, but her love for herself, and the truth, had to come first. The days that followed were filled with self-reflection. Elena felt the weight of both disappointment and relief. She had sought clarity, and she had found it, even though the clarity was painful. 2 days after the confrontation, there was a knock at her door. It was Michael, looking tired and broken. His usual confidence was replaced by a vulnerability that Elena had never seen before. "Elena," he began, his voice trembling, "I know I can't erase the pain you've felt, but I'm here because I need you to understand that I'm willing to change. Truly change. I can't imagine my life without you." Elena's eyes softened, but she remained guarded. "Michael, change is not just about words. It's about actions, about confronting the beliefs that have been ingrained in you by your family and society. It's not something that happens overnight." Michael nodded, tears welling up in his eyes. "I know. And I'm not expecting you to forgive me right away. I've already started having difficult conversations with my family. I confronted my mother, and she admitted to the things you discovered. It was the hardest conversation I've ever had, but I needed to do it." Elena was moved by his sincerity, but she still had doubts. "Michael, it's not just about you challenging your family. It's about you understanding that the biases you've been taught to accept are not just harmful, they're dehumanizing. I'm not asking you to choose between me and your family. I'm asking you to choose between the comfort of ignorance and the discomfort of growth." Michael's shoulders slumped as he absorbed her words. "I understand, and I want to grow, Elena. I want to become the man you deserve, even if it means starting over and earning your trust from scratch." Elena's heart ached, torn between the love she still felt for Michael and the reality of what their relationship had become. "I appreciate your honesty, Michael, but right now I need space to heal. I need to focus on myself and decide what I truly want, not just in a partner, but in my life as a whole." Michael nodded, tears streaming down his cheeks. "I'll wait for you, Elena. However long it takes, I'll be here, working to become better. I just want you to know that I love you more than anything, and I'm willing to fight for us." After Michael left, Elena felt a mixture of sadness and hope. She knew that their story wasn't over, but it also wasn't something that could be resolved quickly. She needed time to process everything that had happened, to heal from the wounds of prejudice and betrayal, and to find a way to reclaim her sense of worth outside of the validation of others. Back at the Whitmore estate, the atmosphere had changed dramatically. Mrs. Whitmore faced backlash from the community when word of Elena's bold revelation began to spread among the staff and their families. The other maids and workers, who had witnessed the confrontation, quietly shared the story with friends and neighbors, who were both shocked and impressed by Elena's bravery. Some people in the town began to distance themselves from the Whitmores, no longer able to ignore the whispers of racism and elitism that had long been hidden beneath the family's polished surface. Mrs. Whitmore, now confronted by the consequences of her actions, found herself in a position she had never imagined, being judged by the very community she had once dominated. For the first time in years, she began to question her own beliefs, though her transformation was slow and reluctant. Her social circle grew smaller, and she became more reclusive, unsure of how to navigate a world that was changing rapidly around her. Peter, on the other hand, remained stubborn, refusing to acknowledge any wrongdoing. "People are too sensitive these days," he muttered to Mrs. Whitmore. "This is just a phase. Michael will come to his senses soon enough." But even Peter's bravado couldn't mask the growing isolation he felt as the once unquestioned support from family and friends began to wane. Elena, meanwhile, decided to use her experience as a catalyst for change. She began working with a local organization that focused on racial equality and empowerment, sharing her story as a means of encouraging others to speak out against discrimination. Her courage inspired others, and she found a renewed sense of purpose. The work wasn't easy, but it was fulfilling in a way she hadn't anticipated. Michael, true to his word, began attending diversity training programs and sought therapy to understand his own biases. He slowly started to build relationships with people from diverse backgrounds, challenging his previously narrow worldview. He knew that the process of unlearning prejudice was long and complex, but he was committed to the journey. After several months, Michael reached out to Elena again. This time, it was not with a plea for reconciliation, but with an update on his personal growth. "I know I'm still not where I need to be," he said over the phone. "But I wanted to let you know that I'm doing the work, not just for you, but for myself. I understand now that love isn't enough if it's not accompanied by respect, understanding, and true equality." Elena felt a sense of closure she hadn't expected. "I'm proud of you, Michael," she replied, her voice soft, "and I'm glad you're finding your path, just as I'm finding mine." The conversation ended with a sense of hope, not for a rekindled romance, but for a future where they both could be better individuals, whether together or apart. As the year came to a close, Elena stood on her apartment balcony, watching the sunset with a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. She had faced the darkness of prejudice, not just in others, but within herself, her fears, doubts, and insecurities. She knew there was still much work to be done, both personally and in the world around her, but she was ready, stronger and more self-assured than ever before. The story of Elena and Michael did not end with a fairy tale wedding, but it did end with growth, understanding, and the promise of a better tomorrow. And in a world where love and respect were often hard-won, that was enough. Thanks for joining us. If you enjoyed this story, don't miss the next one. Click on the video now to watch. We appreciate your support, and we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments.